about a propane tank trailer. That's why it's venting.
Live whenever it is their budget. Depending upon loss, like 3.5%, they get the amendments.
Yeah.
Can you make the amendments?
No, they let her burn.
I don't know, because I haven't looked at them very closely.
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty much the whole crew.
No, we only took, one truck and.
I guess.
And 8 guys.
And the end of the day, it's what we can allow,
Went up
right? I
and
mean,
checked
that's what we.
with them.
Yeah, I mean, we've only got one.
Normally we take a second truck, but that day I said, no. we're only taking one truck. 6 guys, and you need to dress warm.
Out of their budget.
And,
They can decide what.
It wasn't the coldest night.
yep,
Well, not everybody gets
Yeah, not
them.
everyone
You're
gets
lucky.
them.
Okay.
I can't remember what that.
my pickup said 19 below, and then windshield.
And then the windshield.
And then I, told,
Unless you have a quick way of doing it.
with the weather coming on, I said, we're taking one truck.
The budget that
They said, I don't know.
I have to
whether
think
either
about it.
We get stuck up there.
Depending
I don't
how
have my department
the
up there.
conversation goes
Yeah,
tonight, I
we need
guess.
to keep half you
Of course,
guys
you
here.
gotta have something.
That's right.
That kind of weather.
Yeah.
Very easy.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 4:30.
We hadn't had that far in town.
I'd like to begin by standing for a moment of silence, and we'll follow that with Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we could have a roll call, please.
Brad Yant,
Here.
Ken Snyder,
Here.
Steve Hamel, Wayne Barahona.
Here.
Tom Eggers.
Here.
Okay, next item up is approval of our agenda.
So moved.
Support. Any comments or questions? Roll call, please.
Kent,
Aye.
Eggers,
Aye.
Barahona.
Aye.
Snyder.
Aye.
Now, moving to the public forum portion of our meeting. I don't see anyone here. It looks like that so I don't think we have any from the gallery. Is there any written comments that we've taken in?
None.
Okay, there are no written comments, so we can move on then to approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Support.
Roll call, please.
Snyder.
Aye.
Barahona.
Aye.
Eggers.
Aye.
Kent.
Aye.
All right, new business, item 6A, continuation of our discussion of the local option sales tax budgets and urban renewal / TIF. Sam, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to call your attention first while I'm talking here, if you could pull up the additional memo that I have linked. We've also updated all the files except for the explanation tab, which was there last week, and the hotel motel revenue comparison link. That hasn't changed either. I want to briefly hit some of the highlights in the memo, and then I'm going to yield to Todd and Angie and the rest of you if you have anything to add. So first item there under local option sales tax, and I also have a printout for you on big paper if you want to go to the proposed loss sheet. So I'm going to just hit some of the highlighted changes. So I added I don't know how you'll feel about this, but I added a 10% reserve CIP component in addition to the standard reserves. And did that based on previous discussions regarding preparing for emergency services needs, and of course other needs as well that are funded or CIP type expenses. This next one is a big one, and Todd, you can help weigh in on this. We removed the budgeted $250,000 Lewis and Clark expenditure from the current adopted fiscal year and transitioned it to urban renewal, or TIF. This is allowable on the basis of blight remediation and economic development. So Lewis and Clark would then have 420,000 from Public Works Consolidated Project Funds. Remember, we did that last year. 250,000 from TIF, which I just mentioned, and then another 450,000 from TIF in the new fiscal year. Based on a $1.1 million Lewis and Clark hookup number, which is a current estimate, this is about 63% of the total cost coming in from urban renewal. Wastewater treatment plant in 2017 was 30% TIF, 70% rates. East Side Water Tower, 80% TIF and 20% federal funds. So we can, Todd, do you have anything to add on that one?
Not really. I mean, the 1.1 is still a bit of a moving target. I am working on updated cost estimates. Plans and specs for that project just went in for agency review actually this week, so time will tell. I have asked for an updated cost estimate, but that's the target we have for today.
Okay. Number 3 was adjusted the property insurance number from 187 or to 187 from 170, and that was based on the recommendation from Tom at Perspective. Added a link to the letter from Upper Des Moines received yesterday. They're asking for 3,300 again, and they well, their letter speaks for itself, but they provide a pretty good service to the community, particularly utility customers. Number 5, we changed the pool operations to 62,000 and change from 52,000. This is comprised of lifeguard wages. That's about half the pool budget. We do realize you may not desire to have any coming out for wages, but since it's split down virtually down the middle, it's really a distinction without a difference. And the cleanest number Todd, Angie, and I recommend that we use is the lifeguard wages. It's just the more predictable number of the two. Changed cemetery operations a bit. A few years ago, 100% of the cemetery wages were coming out of water, and that is why it was changed, and at that time is when we made a play for using some lost funds for that. This is a positive change in terms of the bottom line for lost is changing the rec operations line from 107 to 54,000, no full-time wages. Remove the transfer of 29,000 to general fund for CIP items. This was for main building improvements, software, etc. This now can be allocated by department as part of the regular budget instead of coming from lost. Angie made a nice discovery this morning, and she reminded me that the USDA grant match wasn't calculated in, so that's a nice, that makes the process a little bit easier. So if you look at the bottom line at the bottom of your big sheet of paper, the amount available, $939,000. We have 627 funded so far. You have 321 remaining, and you have to work with, and you have unfunded requests of 619,000. So you can move some items from the far right column into the middle column, and it's not as probably stressful as it would have been before, but there still is an operational deficit. Angie, anything to add?
No, none at this time.
Are there any questions for Sam or Ange at this time from the council?
So one of the concerns that we talked about last week was carryover, cash on hand. With these adjustments in regards to lost, is there any effect of that? Is there any positive effect of that? Cash on hand go back up now?
Well, it's certainly improved, but you still have a, how do I explain this, Todd? I mean, because we had spent down a fair amount of our cash before, yes, the 250,000 from lost helps, but you still have a balance going into 2023 of, Angie, do I have that right? Is it still $30,000?
$30,873.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a minor adjustment to that Angie and I made this afternoon, but nonetheless, that's your operating balance, Sam. You still have your reserve of 275, correct?
Right.
That we're leaving untouched.
Where do those reserves come from?
It's unspent money from past years that has just been put aside.
Okay, so it's when you have a carryover like that, at what point does a carryover become an investment or a reserve?
When the investment is making more interest than the checking account.
So you basically just look at it as kind of let's move some money every so often to maximize the benefit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get to zero, Tom, the net effect is you end up with a $275,000 balance. That make sense?
It does. I just know that we've been using it.
We haven't
Over the
been
past-
using the 275.
Right.
But with
everything
that
ab-
being said, we
everything
had
above
to
that
use
we've
by
used.
52,000 of it in the current fiscal year, because it was at 327.
Right. So my point is that we've been using that fund, that cash balance, one way or another to assuming operation. Okay?
So
So are we putting ourselves at risk by not making that reserve higher than the 30,873? That's really where my question's at. What kind of risk are we taking there?
I don't know what kind of a risk you're taking, but I like having the savings account there. I don't like spending down the cash. I mean, we did that coming into this fiscal year to the tune of about, was it $300,000 that we had a cash balance last year? And then in this budget, we decided to spend that down and dip into the reserves.
but if we're dipping into the reserves, then we're spending more money than we're making.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Correct.
And do I remember reading that right? The reserves are held in case we need to have a grant match? Or is that right or not? Or what is that reserve, that 200, that balance that we want in there, right? What is that?
It's just a balance that has been there for years. When we weren't getting good interest on any interest on our checking account, Arlene would move money, leftover cash money, into reserves, CDs, things like that, to where she could generate interest.
I see.
I've just left it. I haven't moved it back.
Okay.
There has never been a year I've worked here at some point during the fiscal year that somebody hasn't said, we could use a little bit of loss to cover this or to do that. I mean,
It's not
it'd
budgeted.
be like running your home with
Yeah,
absolutely $0 in the savings account.
because you never know when that furnace, boiler, air conditioner's gonna,
We bailed ourselves out with it.
Right.
All right, any other questions?
So in periods of time where you have used that as kind of a bailout or a parachute or however you want to describe it, is that money returned to the reserves, or is that just expended and that's the end of it?
And no, I wouldn't say it's returned to reserves.
Okay.
No.
So eventually it'll run out. I mean, if you keep dipping,
Yes.
yeah.
Eventually.
then what?
then people aren't gonna get their requests that they want, basically.
Well, it's just like a business. You either raise your prices or lower your costs.
So when it comes to lost, should we be going back to the budget to where lost is covering by department and have each department in those areas reduce that by the 3.5% immediately?
I've thought the same thing. That seems to me, if we're planning for that, why wouldn't we do that? And spread it around.
Have them make the discernment on what they're going to do in regards to making priorities within their own budgets, so.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if we know if that's what our budget's gonna be planned on, I think their budget should be planned on it as well.
Nobody's saying anything.
If I might.
Yes, please.
So I'm processing this, so my thought, first of all, is that you have a couple of different funding sources, right? So with general funds, you have a different set of funding sources than you do for local option sales tax. Local option sales tax is exactly that. It's the 1% optional tax that was enacted by the voters. I suppose from a philosophical standpoint, you could say, well, because the state has recommended a 3.5% cut in revenues from local option sales tax, that you could say, well, let's take that same 3.5% and apply that to operational budgets. But that is a different dynamic. So, Todd, help me out with this one.
Cost expenditures are typically not what I would categorize as operational type expenditures. We're utilizing lost expenditures for project or specific type purchases more than we are operational. Reducing them by 3.5%, Tom, closes the gap, but we still have a $300,000 shortfall between requests and actual money, right? And then, so that's going to close that gap, but it's not going to solve our problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking only about the $33,000 of reduction.
And that's really a non-important number.
Right.
The important number is you've got 300,000 left available. You've got 600,000 requests.
Right.
And how are we going to manage through those requests and decide which ones get funded via lost or which ones need to go to general fund expenditure or some type of other expenditure?
Right, I understand.
That's where I'm missing the 3.5% operational. I mean, I can cut the pool operations by 3.5%, that's fine. But then that means they're going to go up 3.5% on the general fund side, right? So then you need to see the net outcome of that.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't quite understand all the intricacies of that, but there still has to be some kind of accountability to revenue, to expenditure. And what I am saying is I don't think the council can make those decisions as well as the departments can make those decisions. So out of that $33,000 of reduction coming from loss based on the 3.5% that we've been talking about, whatever that portion is to your department, I'm just going to use you as an example, Todd, whatever that portion, that $33,000 is, what I would say is how would you compensate within your budget, whether it be operational or whether it be project or request or whatever, to
Variable
trim that
depending
down?
upon department. Right, it'd be variable depending upon department request. Some requests would go away,
Right.
some would make changes. Yeah.
And I guess that's where I'm heading to, is shouldn't that all be done before we sit down and start looking at whether it's a 600,000 or it's a 500,000 plus deficit between requests and our revenue at this point?
Yeah, and I think what Sam is trying to tell you in his spreadsheet is that the operational costs that are plugged in there because that's what staff believes needs to be there. And we're more looking for project-specific advice. Is that a more fair statement, Sam? You can tell us to make those cuts and we'll gladly do that, right? I mean, we can make that change if that's what you'd like to see.
And in the end, we may, but at this point, I'm just airing it out for conversation.
Sure.
So that we can discuss it beforehand, instead of waiting to the very end and then try to fit it into some kind of rebudgeting process that Angie's going to say, oh, I got to have it Monday. I'd rather get it going now if that's what we think is the feasible thing to do.
So, Tom, can I go back and have you repeat your question? Because I didn't catch it all, what you said at the beginning to start this conversation.
Yeah, the lost at 3.5% constitutes about a reduction of $33,000 of revenue, okay? What I'm saying is can that be addressed department by department prior to the budget, prior to the budgeting workshop, so that we know that each department has taken that consideration and prioritized it the way they want to in that reduction, instead of us trying to figure out how to do that.
I can speak on behalf of the fire department. When we do our budget, what's in our budget is things that have been thought through in a manner that is needs of the department. We're not just throwing numbers there because we want this stuff. It's needs coming out of our department.
Right.
The other side of it is, maybe we really need to seriously look at seeing what the increase of the new assessments are, that's coming into the budget. The other thing is, maybe we need to take more off TIF to help all the budget. From the general budget, will flow down to this, release some of that TIF money. Put it in our budget.
And I would say on all of those examples, that the department would need to look at that to prioritize where they would be able to make a concession if they needed to.
I think probably Todd and other departments can probably speak the same way. They're bare bones, a lot of it. There's not a lot of thrills in it.
Yeah, no, we don't build flaw in our budget.
So,
And I don't expect that you do, but if we're going to have 3.5% less revenue and loss, we're going to have to address it somehow.
then we make it up by releasing stuff out of TIF to compensate for some of this stuff that should be wages, salary, benefits. That's a general budget coming out of the general fund, in my book. So if you need more money for the general fund to help the lost out, then we got to release stuff from TIF. Or we have to do the dreaded thing, raise the levy. And I might be getting ahead of myself before we start the budget workshops.
Well, I think that's what this process is here to do.
So I mean, we need more money to operate the city, then we've got to take stuff off TIF.
So based upon that, Sam, is there a way to compensate for the 3.5% of loss to $33,000 through another revenue opportunity? Have we looked at that in this analysis?
We have. And there's
Okay.
a number of things that we have moved, and some things that we have cut.
So you've addressed it, and even after it's been addressed, we're still sitting at $627,000 between revenue and request.
Yeah, if you look at where we were sitting on, with the same spreadsheet on December 21, it's quite a bit different than, I think it was $500,000 difference on the bottom line in terms of the unfunded request. So I think we're sitting a lot better, but there's still some difficult decisions that need to be made. Now, I may have made your job a little bit more difficult with what I said in the beginning, and I think we probably need to circle back to that, but in the yellow box, I took 10% of the 918,000 and I put it in CIP savings. Okay, so you really have now two reserves, right? So you may decide that that's too much. I feel good about that. And based on the conversations that I've had with some of you and collectively at the last meeting, I think you feel good about that too, but it makes the rest of there's some other difficult discussions that need to be had.
Okay.
I think we spend a lot of time talking about 3.5% when in reality we had a lot more of a deficit to make up for that than this 3.5% in change in revenue.
It certainly segued us into it, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did.
Yeah, okay. That's fine, go ahead. We can move the discussion on, Sam. Thank you.
How much, you said we've got $300,000 to cover $600,000 of requests this year. What was it last year in terms of requests? And did we cover all of it with that carryover? Whoever, I don't know.
You remember, Ange, in the budget? I don't remember the budget. I think last year we were able to really fund stuff because we had an additional cash balance of like $400,000, so.
Correct.
It's a little easier to be Santa Claus then. And
I think
that's
all
not
the
good
requests
terminology,
were
but
funded.
There's no Santa Claus
it's a little
involved
easier
with
to
your
fund.
budget.
Be a good steward.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry. I retract that statement.
But yeah, I think all the requests were funded with us tapping into some reserves to put us in the black.
Right.
For the end of this fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's also important you understand in the exercise that we are giving you the projected number that the state is recommending we utilize because we believe that is the right thing to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that's how Lost is going to react in our community.
Correct.
But if you want us to, as staff, I don't know how we go against what the state is recommending for our budget request. So just please keep that in mind as we go through the process.
What seems like we're spending a lot of time discussing 3.5%, $33,000. That's a drop in the bucket
So,
in light of the bigger picture of things.
right, so what Tom is saying, the 33 is the difference from here to here, from what we budgeted this year, and then taking the 3.5% decrease.
Right.
Todd is saying down here, we've got $321,000 to work with, but we've got $619,000 in requests, which are all of these. Which of course doesn't work.
Right, but talking about the 3.5% isn't gonna do, I mean, we could have the departments cut 3.5%, we're still gonna be 265, whatever, short.
But then again, they're only gonna cut their capital improvement part of the budget, correct?
Right, it would
Yeah,
just be
so
right here.
it's just your
It's
request
not
you're
their
gonna
operating.
cut. You're not gonna cut your operations expense.
Right.
Yeah. The challenge we have with this budget cycle, in my opinion, is that we have the realization of inflation since the last budget. and our operational budgets are going to be affected by the inflation. So
And I'm
that's
sure-
the reality.
And I'm sure if they were like the fire department, that was major conversation of our budget, was what it's costing us now to do contracted maintenance services and that,
Yep,
and that all increases our budget.
right. As well as just the
And
required
it will go up
wage
again.
adjustments that we've had to make, and,
Again, they'll probably go up this year again,
right.
so.
So I think we're seeing the sting of that in the operational side. But we also have a long list of projects ahead of us, some already in play, some aren't. So, yeah, I think the challenge is going to be where are we going to get the revenue from and how we're going to address that revenue. And Brad kind of laid out some scenarios. And I think that's where the discussion will probably have to go, at least on the operational side, so. I don't know if this is the kind of input you wanted, Sam, but.
So these 9 items you have listed under lost,
Mhm.
is that reflected on this spreadsheet?
It is.
And we're still 300,000 short? We need to look in a different bucket. Loss isn't gonna do it. Like Brad said, your general fund or whatever, but operations, but we consider wring our hands about loss, but it's not there. And it won't be.
Well, I think the primary
Even if it
difference,
was, even if we were 3.5% to the other side, to the good, instead of
Right.
going down, we're still a long ways away from covering what needs to be covered.
I mean, I think, looking at it, you've got a lot of bigger CIP items that weren't there even last year when we had to try and float with the cash reserves. I'm going through here, the asks are relatively similar down the line. You got your Lewis and Clark, of course, that comes out, but then, yeah. Well, I'm saying it's out of that. I'm just comparing this year to last, and the differences of how we were able to fund, of how much into the reserve money or into the cash balance that we had to go.
Okay, I hate to say this, but I think I found another error.
Are we gonna make our job even harder?
No, Sam, for the police capital items down there on the bottom, the 88,671,
Mhm.
you took that off of their CIP, correct?
I did.
So do we actually need 2 police vehicles up top for $100,000? Or wouldn't that be part of their CIP? So. Here's two police vehicles, but wouldn't that be included in the CIP number?
You're circling within 22, 23, right? There were 2 this year.
23, 24. There's 2 in 23, 24, each for 50,000. You've got the replacement canine police vehicle and new police vehicle. And then you've got, you moved them out of there. Never mind. No, I think you're okay. You moved them to line 79, which is the police CIP. Okay, never mind. You're good. Sorry. God, that was nice, actually.
And what precedent is there for, you know, I see a number of things that we've made multi-year obligations to fund. What precedent is there for pausing that funding or revisiting that amount?
Well, I'll give you examples from two prior communities that I have had direct experience with. One dealt with a similar situation where there were so many outside requests, and it became so difficult to say no and juggle all of the requests. The council just said enough, and we are going to set X percent aside and call it and convene an investment committee that will then make recommendations to the council, and you only have X number of dollars to work with. And all the groups, such as the golf course, Mid-Sioux, Upper Des Moines, NCC, some of the others would all have to vie for that. That's one thought. Another would be is in another community I was in, the council said we appreciate these outside groups, and they're not technically outside groups. They're part of our community. We need them, but you don't see the school district investing money like this, and you don't see other governmental entities giving money away like this, and we would like to be able to do that again, but we're just not able to do it right now. So then pull it back, but then that's going to create another set of effects. But there's a reason why we're bringing this forward to you now, because this is not an easy discussion, and we've been able to defer that discussion because of good times in the past. And I disagree, for one, I disagree with the state's recommendation, but I think we should accept it, because if we turn out to be wrong, then we're looking at deeper cuts. And by accepting their recommendation and hoping that they're wrong, we've improved our cash position and our reserves, right? So.
And Wayne, to give an example of something that the Park and Rec Board did, for instance, last year the council funded the first $75,000 allocation to the splash pad project, right? Well, knowing that that was one of many to get the project off the ground and going anywhere, the Park and Recreation Board has done very little with that money. They've done very little research to get a rough idea of what that project could look like. But until there's enough money to get that project off the ground, they are not going gung-ho. So for instance, if you would choose not to fund their $75,000 request this year, we put that splash pad project on hold, or force us as staff to attempt to come up with another bucket, in Greg's terms. I don't believe that there is another bucket at this point for a general funded recreational type opportunity like that, unless we're going to some sort of passing fundraising or something. You would simply just pause that project. That's one example. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I mean that's the scenario. They didn't go spend that $75,000. I think they spent 5 or 6 of it, Ange?
Barely.
On some very minimal research of what could this thing cost, would it work in our facility, what would it be? That's a grand total. I think that's an estimated $300,000 project.
You two found an error that I made this afternoon. Is that
Just that there
Does
was
that help us out?
there was a $30,000 credit to park updates twice.
okay?
So there's an increase of $30,000.
Right.
Well, what he was saying about, is that what you were meaning, stuff like outside projects that splash pad, is that what you're talking about when you say outside projects?
No, he's more
No.
talking like Upper Des Moines and
No,
Mid-Sioux.
Yeah,
Okay.
when we're talking outside, and I really shouldn't use the term outside, but non-city entities. Yeah, like Upper Des Moines and the golf course
Okay,
and
all right, I see what you mean now.
NCC and school district turf, that type of thing. You want to make a transition to TIF and urban renewal and come back to loss?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so for TIF, the biggest change is the starting number is now reduced by 250,000 by moving the upcoming lost expenditure, moving lost expenditure to TIF. The rest of the explanation is above. So that changes your starting cash position. On a relatively minor note, the town clown payment of $25,000 in fiscal year 21-22 was payment 1 of 2. If you remember, payment 2 is going to be what we negotiated is when the code enforcement zoning permit platform was ready for 3 years of use, and that clock wasn't going to start until it was ready. And Town Cloud has been very gracious in this. That process has been delayed with Steve Halgren coming on board and getting familiar with how we operate before we jump into that. So at some point there would be another 25,000 after doing some research. It could come from lost reserves. I do believe it can come from TIF, as a direct link can be drawn to blight remediation and facilitating economic development activity. There's a request from O'Brien County Economic Development. It's a relatively small request, money-wise, percentage. It's a little bit bigger. And then there's the 3 big items on this list are the $450 for Lewis and Clark for 23-24, plus the $250 that would come out of 22-23, which reduces the starting balance. We're proposing, when I say we, Kurt and I are proposing the exercise of, at least consider it, commercial industrial land options. You set aside half now, and then you don't do the exercising until 24-25. Then you have Western Avenue. The estimate is $2.4 million. That could go up. It will go up. So anyway, for the moment, I want to live in the $2.4 million world. How's that? So estimated $1 million in remaining bond funds after the water tower project, plus $750,000 in FAST Act funds. So we'd recommend that $650 at least in the following fiscal year be set aside. Todd, are you ready to say what you think that number could end up being? You and I talked about a real high number that Beck had come up with, but you were working with them to try to reduce that number.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to scare everybody out of the room.
Okay. Right. So then, take this big sheet that you have in front of you for TIF, start at the top. You have debt service of $299,000. That's the standard payment for budgeted for 23-24. We added a line right below that. If you want, we could early pay off the remaining 285 of that. Angie and I discussed it. The interest rate is relatively low. doesn't affect the overall bond capacity too much. We're not planning on any new debt in the coming year. But you certainly we could opt to put that in there and pay that off early. There would be associated costs with that, legal fees, relatively minor. I think we could probably leave that as it is, but that's an option to consider. So the next 4 line items are standard or baked in, so to speak. New rebates. Kurt and I had talked about this. You could add $25,000 there just in case there's an upfront TIF request. For example, we'd explored some upfront TIF grants for Quick Star and Dollar Tree, and those weren't needed ultimately, but you might want to leave an opening for that. We have the economic development allocation for O'Brien County. That's a slight increase. SCDC, Kurt's proposing that stay the same. Storefront the same, correct, Kurt? Yep. Rides, they're proposing the same. And by the way, that's a blue underline because if you go into the online version of this, I have a Dropbox link with the letter there. Children's World, they're asking for $30,000 instead of $25,000. Blight remediation. This is for projects like the house on, the Burton Johnson house, for example. The Walter Nelson property would be another example. Consultant professional fees, if we don't update our urban renewal plan in this current, in the upcoming fiscal year, we probably won't spend all of that, but we should leave that in there in case we need to, just in case. To Brad's point, I have been working with the county on getting a list of properties that we can explore for an additional release. The area that I have in mind is the Quick Star neighborhood. It's a complicated process for releasing TIF because the legal descriptions don't necessarily match the parcel numbers. So it's quite a process. The release that we did last year should take effect. Angie, is it in effect now, or would it be in effect
in the next fiscal year?
The next fiscal year. So that should be significant. But to Brad's point, I believe that additional release is necessary. It's just a slow process.
What deems an area to be eligible for being released from TIF?
Well, first of all, if you don't have any active projects. Okay, so one area you could not release would be the area that has the water tower, the new water tower and the lines. As long as that bond is active, that cannot be released from TIF. An example of an area that can be released and has been released is Sunshine Addition. It's almost fully developed. Another example is Runger, almost fully developed. The Quick Star neighborhood is almost fully developed. In a few years, I would say you could do some significant release in the neighborhood of Ag Partners and AGP, where there's been significant investment made. You wouldn't be able to release the Western Avenue area because that would be subject to a bond. Remember, the bond authorization for the water tower included Western Avenue. Okay, so but there are, if you leave the property in the urban renewal area and release the increment, and you can do that too. And that's what we've done. Is we're not removing land from the urban renewal area. We've been releasing the increment. So to briefly describe it, let's say you have a piece of property that's worth $10,000 with nothing on it, and then you build it up and now it's worth $110,000. The difference in the taxable valuation from $10,000 to $110,000, that $100,000 in new valuation, the taxes on that $100,000 is known as your increment. So when you release, then you're releasing the taxes on that $100,000, whether it's a $3,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Yep, I get that.
Okay.
So then, on the front end of that, we identify an area that we want to put into TIF because we know it's going to be I guess because we want to incentivize growth, right? That's essentially the reasoning behind TIF, if I understand it.
Two things mainly. It's incentivize growth and remediate blight. So you added the Bethel Church site, for example, and City Park. So that was to facilitate both. Todd and I have talked about eventually coming to you and asking to expand the urban renewal area to include 11th Street and maybe 10th Street, so that you could do more sewer remediation and sewer lines. And that's a big ask right now. And we believe that we need to allow time to catch up with some of the projects that we've already done before we take on new projects. And he has enough on his plate with the water tower project and Western Avenue. I don't know that we need to add anything big, but I would like us to see keep an open door to adding more property to TIF if it's accompanied by the appropriate TIF release. Because TIF ultimately should not be a lockbox.
Right. But in a scenario that you've laid out, 10th and 11th Street, the increment would be the increase in value based on the improvements made by the money generated from this particular urban renewal area or TIF, or however this particular one would be laid out?
Well, that would be a little bit different, Wayne, because what you'd have there with 10th and 11th Street, you really wouldn't be adding value, you'd be remediating blight. So you would have to sacrifice expenditures in other areas of the TIF zone. Let's say you wanted to do another street somewhere. If you added 10th and 11th Street and you wanted to redo all of the sewer, that would be extremely expensive. So let's just say it's $3 million. I made that up, but it'd be a big number.
You just did 2 blocks.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll stick with
really big number.
I'll stick with my $3 million number. But anyway, if you add both stretches into the urban renewal zone, you can then spend increment that comes from elsewhere in the urban renewal zone to fix 10th and 11th Street, and that's what we do all the time. You know, like with Rainbow Drive, for example. Rainbow Drive doesn't have enough increment for that big of a project, and neither did Oak Street. So the increment from the east and the west side of town went to fix that area. And North Fifth Avenue has relatively low valuation, and that was a large project. That was increment that came from all over the community, from elsewhere in TIF, to do that project. And that's why strategically we've done street projects all over town. And I think it's $7 million worth of projects if you add them all together, Post Office, North Fifth Avenue, some of these other areas, and that's come from TIF all over the community. But it has not come from property tax or TIF dollars from the core of the community, which is not like 10th and 11th Street. So from the south side of City Park all the way to the north side of the post office and east of 4th Avenue, none of that area is in TIF, all the way to past the Christian school. So,
I get it, thank you.
okay, we'll keep going.
Yep.
The trees, Hills Park, City Park, and rights of way. We'd worked with Ayers and Cooney, and because of the urban renewal plan was amended in 2021, if you remember, to justify that the emerald ash borer is definitely considered blight. You know, Todd and I started out with a much higher number, but we didn't really know, we weren't really sure what we could even, what our local contractors could even handle in terms of tree removal, or how fast we needed to do tree removal. So we settled on the number of $100,000. Thought we'd start with taking care of some of the ash in Hills and City Park.
It's about 10% of the estimated cost.
Really?
Thinking of why we're talking about trees, would that also cover thinning some of the trees out in the cemetery? Because some of those, this is getting squirrel moment off the trail, but some of those trees are really, really bad shape.
We had a contractor out there, actually, the last couple of weeks, we've been starting, Brad, but more needs to happen.
Okay.
But yes, we did get a start. We just spent about $15,000 on there, actually.
We can get back on track now.
No, it's
No,
good.
no.
That's why we're
No.
here.
I'm glad to hear you notice it, because you're right, there's more that needs done yet, but
Yeah, there's some bad shape evergreens.
but we did just start. We just spent about $15,000 removing trees in the cemetery here.
Okay.
You have City Park ADA and concrete asphalt fixes. That goes along with some of the ADA improvements that have been done over the last few years on the corners. You have general street and stormwater improvements. So there's several examples that we can come up with on stormwater improvements. Town Cloud, we talked about that earlier, Lewis and Clark. You've seen what we did there. Western Avenue. And this is where this line item, you could say, competes a little bit with the land purchase line item. I guess depending on how much more expensive Western Avenue gets, it might compete a little bit more. But you know, as we have seen with land in this area, Kurt and I, our philosophy is that, you know, we have the options to buy this land. We also have several years before it goes up again, but it takes a couple of years of planning to affect this and make this happen, and it is better to buy land now and plan later than plan to buy land. So I think that's kind of where this comes in, but we can have that conversation too if you want now. And then before we do that, I want to mention something really important, because I don't want somebody to look at this later and say that I played with the numbers. I kind of did. But what we've got here is you've got the three airport line items, and I'll go to the far right there and you'll see 10, 10, and 25%. The way it really is supposed to work with urban renewal, the numbers of 135, 631, and 142 need to be in that first column. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're doing is we're putting the match numbers in that column, but the way that it works with the FAA is we need to upfront the entire amount, and then we have to float it for a short amount of time, file the right paperwork, and we get the money back. So, but if we show it that way on the spreadsheet, the TIF fund goes upside down and we can't do anything else, or can't do as many other projects. And so we're disclosing that we're calculating it this way, but if the three projects aren't all being done at the same time, it works out just fine. So.
And most of the holds are less than a month.
Right.
How much what?
Most of the holds are less than a month of time. So you're floating the
Floating
money
the
for a
money.
short
Oh, okay,
period of
I see.
time.
Okay. I thought you were saying holes, and then I was thinking airport runway.
You may hold the
Hold-
entire
hold
amount,
onto
yeah.
it.
The reimbursements come within a few weeks.
Yes.
So, going back to Western Avenue, so we bonded for part of that project. And is this, this particular line item that's blank here at the moment, is that for the shortfall and, or the difference in what the actual project cost is and what we've bonded for?
Yeah, because the project is still under design, Wayne, I mean, we had a project estimate to go get the $750,000 grant, but obviously construction has changed substantially since then, and we've also been looking at the project differently. When we bonded for the water tower, we included $100,000 in that bond. Well, we included, I should rephrase that.
Yeah, up to.
Well, we included some design work, right, so that we could get started. But, you know, our position on the water tower project, both pipeline and tower construction, came back very favorable. So there's more dollars available in that bond for the Western Avenue project than what we initially paid. Yes, we will need to bond much more money for that project. Sam's point is that there's potentially 1.7 available right now, and he's using my cost estimate of 2.4, which will be higher by the time we actually go to bid, because if you recall, that is a 2024 construction project. Right? And costs are obviously going to go up between now and forward. And we had the very original 2.4 number did have some inflationary values built into it, but not the type of construction inflation that we have seen.
Sure.
I can't give you guys a good number, but that project will it's going to. We are also in the process, I don't know if you recall or not, but in the current fiscal year, we're working on a south side sewer system study that encompasses a whole bunch of our collection system and, you know, all kinds of options for potential proposed growth, right? So as part of that, we're looking at some of our lift stations on that end, and there is a force main for the 330th lift station that lays underneath Western Avenue, or a portion of Western Avenue. In my original cost estimate of 2.4, I did not contemplate replacing that force main. But as part of this evaluation, the south side study, we are evaluating that lift station and that force main. So if that comes in to be part of the Western Avenue project, obviously that will add a ton of expense to that job as well. And so we may have to look for bonding that. But I don't want to tear a road out, put a new road in, and then dig it up 5 years later to put a new force main in. So I may be picking back another project on the job. That'll have a significant, potential significant change in cost of the project. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Angie, do you happen to know how long we have until 27B is paid off?
No, I don't, off the top of my head,
Okay.
sorry.
Find out.
Any other questions or comments? I think we need to move on. If you're going to continue on with the last one. Hotel motel.
Yeah, the hotel motel, Kurt, tell us what's happening there. You sent out a nice message to me this afternoon on how things are looking.
Everybody get this handout, Sam?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it speaks for itself. If you look back to 2012, when we were collecting 5%, you know, we had the, went up for vote in 2016, where the constituents agreed to bump it from 5% to 7%. You can see our revenue has continued to increase each year until we hit COVID in 2020. We saw a drastic decrease there, which we anticipated. But then we started the rebound in 2021. and most significantly in 2022, where we set an all-time record here this last calendar year of $166,000. So I think it's trending upwards. I think we're rebounding out of COVID. I anticipate the increase to continue, especially now getting a second hotel out east online here in the spring. And then with Tricia doing what she's doing out at the event center, we're seeing events continuing to increase there. I think that's going to continue to increase our tourism. Rise Ministry is doing some good stuff. Tourism activities at all-time high, I think, in Sheldon. So I think hotel motel tax, while we see it increase our an all-time record in 2022, I think it's going to continue as we move into 2023. So I think that revenue stream is working well for Sheldon.
Will the new hotel show any impact next year?
It should, because it's always a quarter in the rear. So it's not like taxes were a year in the rear for property taxes. This is actual. So that'll go online, we're hoping in May. And so I would think by year end, we should see some impact there for the new hotel, yes.
Kurt, I'm going to ask you an impossible question. So with the...
Well, you don't expect a great answer.
That's correct, yes. Looking at, the record total here for 2022, how much of that is growth and how much of that is inflation?
I think you're seeing growth for sure. I think occupancy is there, especially with Holiday Inn Express going through the renovations. The last couple of years, they've been offline a little bit on some of their rooms too. So they haven't been at full capacity. We're still seeing the growth there. Some of it's due to inflation. I think you're seeing room rates, I think, increase across the board. That's not just Sheldon. I think that's just in the market in general. You're seeing, so we all go to hotels, we're paying more money.
Yep.
It just is what it is. So if you take 7% off of 100 versus 150, obviously revenues are going to increase based on that. So I think it's a combination. I think our occupancy rates are up, but I think prices are up in relation to that. So good question.
Anyone else?
Are there metrics as far as the number of available rooms in a year, or however, like as far as the number of rooms rented, that sort of thing? Just more curious from it would help with maybe answering my question a little bit, knowing how those occupancy numbers trend.
Yeah, so there's no metrics that we receive at a local level. I mean, you could probably look into the state level with the Department of Revenue based on the reports that they receive from our local hotels. The next process would be just going direct to the hotel themselves and ask them. That's confidential information that they're not necessarily required to share at a local level, but I think those would be your two options. The public information would come from the state, the private information would come from the hotel themselves. So there are metrics that we, as a city, don't have access to.
Understood. Thank you.
Didn't we get some of that information when we did that hotel study?
We did.
A few years back?
Yep, we did the assessment. You're right, Brad. We requested it from the hotels, and they gave it to us. So it was good information for us at the development committee level as we were trying to figure out if another hotel made sense. We just to make sure that we weren't cannibalizing what we had. So that information was key for that progress in that project. Yep.
So that's the one side of the coin. The flip side is, I would assume requests are not all in yet in terms of, this is the revenue that we're contemplating, but what about the expenditures? Are those going up as well? Are we going to face a shortfall like we are in some of the other?
As far as the marketing committee level or just the city standpoint?
Well, yeah, everything.
I would say expenditures on the marketing committee level are not necessarily going up because I think they still want to be conservative coming out of COVID. I think this will be the first year budget-wise where they may make an increase on expected revenue. But the last 2 years, they've been pretty conservative with those requests. So I think once we get into 2023 and get into 2024, a year from now, Greg, I think that's when we'll see greater confidence on what we can start increasing as far as expenditures. I think we're getting a little premature in 2023, even though these numbers are coming out. maybe a little premature. I think the marketing committee would agree with that as far as going full go in adding additional expenditures. Like, let's gain more confidence. I think we're going to get there a year from now. Then maybe be a little more aggressive on some future projects, which marketing committee has some projects in the queue that they would like to consider down the in the future. They've been a little bit restricted because of COVID, right? I mean, they've really spent down their reserves to almost zero, so now they'll be able to build some of that stuff up for future projects. So,
Anyone else? Then I would like to move on, unless you need more information. I don't know what you're going to do with all this discussion right now. My head's just swimming, so if yours is as well.
I think
take it, Dave.
this is helpful for when we go back and start contemplating this. I know it will be
Yeah,
for me.
take these home with you and
Yeah.
mark them up and bring them with you to the budget workshops, and we can still talk about it on the 18th too. Okay, thank you.
All right, then let's move on to reports, starting with Sam. Anything from you?
No, sir.
Todd, anything else you'd like to contribute? Kurt? Chief? Angie?
No, thank you.
Council to my left?
Just encourage residents, if you live near a fire hydrant, there are some that are getting covered with snow. If you would kindly please shovel them out. That will make our job much easier if we ever have to respond to your neighborhood.
Okay. Ken? To my right?
I just want to take a moment and thank our street department for the absolute heroic job that they've been doing in trying to clear all the snow. It's been, I won't say unprecedented, but it certainly seems like it if we look through the very narrow scope of what the last couple of years have seemed like. So I just want to extend my thanks to them for being ready, being available, and thanks to you, Todd, for commanding the ship and making it all work. I know that there are a lot of long hours, and there's a somewhat disappointing editorial in the paper about the performance of the city cleanup crews, and I think that I think that's ill-founded. I think you guys have continued to go above and beyond, and I commend you for it, and thank you.
Tom?
Nothing. Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback onto that, because I received a letter this week, and there was another person that stopped in with winter snow removal. Questions are being asked, and the citizen that sent a letter, I asked both Sam, I showed the letter to Sam and Todd, and Todd came up with an excellent reply, giving information about what goes into the decisions that take place once the snow occurs or is planning, when the forecast is for snow. I would just like to read that so that everyone is somewhat better informed on what all goes into it. It's not just hey, wait till it starts to snow. There's a lot of questions, a lot of things that happen, and they don't always get it right, but to their credit, I think they're doing a bang-up job as well. But I'm going to just read the letter. That maybe will help to answer some more questions that people that haven't asked are wondering. Good morning, John Doe. Looks like we're off to another tough weather week. I'm at least happy that the major ice has missed us so far. This is a letter dated January 3, by the way. I'm sorry to hear that you disagree with our course of action over the last snow event. I've heard positive and negative comments about that situation. We are used to that. As Sam stated below, our snow ordinance discusses removing snowfalls of greater than 2 inches of accumulation and gives timelines of 12 to 48 hours from the end of accumulation to complete such actions. While it is nice to have that in writing, every storm event is different and not one size fits all. We evaluate every situation and handle it as how we see best. I never use previous year's spending as a guideline as to how much I'm willing to spend in a current fiscal year. Each storm receives what we believe is the appropriate amount of funding. When deciding how much effort to put towards a certain storm, we factor a snow snow timing, wind temperatures, future forecasts, and so on. Because of all those factors, with the last storm, we decided to keep roads passable, but not put full force on them because we knew that they would need to be redone anyway. In my estimation, handling the event the way we did saved the city around $30,000 and resulted in similar road conditions. I have no issue with spending the money, but only want to spend when there is a bang for the buck. I fully believe we handled the storm appropriately. You also mentioned on-call people. Yes, we always have people on call. As a matter of fact, someone on my team goes to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We provide essential services that require that kind of detail and dedication. I have a small team that provides all water, sewer, and street services. With the bitter cold, wind, power outages, and snow over the holidays, we were plenty busy and down a little bit because of a couple surgeries that took place. That's not in the letter, I just add editorializing here. In closing, we make many decisions that affect the public on a daily basis. We take those decisions very seriously and wish they were always easy decisions to make. Unfortunately, they are not. They can be very hard and many times criticized. We constantly evaluate our own decision-making. We are not perfect, but I do promise you we always do what we believe is best for the citizens of Sheldon. And I echo these comments wholeheartedly. Thank you, Todd, for responding as you did. And pass along my compliments and appreciation, too, for the work that the city's been doing. Not easy. So, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I will give you that motion.
Roll call, please.
Hint.
Aye.
Snyder?
Aye.
Farahona?
Aye.
Egger?
Aye.
Will you be here in 2 weeks? Yes. Will you be here in 3 weeks for the budget? Yes. Okay. Which meeting were you gonna miss? I thought I had both of you gone for a meeting. I must have gotten my wires crossed. It must have been Pete this meeting and him.
You got a lot more empathy for him than me.
Better than or even if it was good.
But
I wouldn't.
I know, I'm so sorry, I saw you doing it again, and I was like, oh my God.
Should they